If you've got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. These shirts are live at barbellapparel.com. Link is in the description. Today, we are on episode 3 of Fire Your Coach. We are moving away from some of the abstract discussions about stress and recovery and how we actually adapt from training. Important as those are, we're going to move towards things that you can actually sink your teeth into, that you can use to make specific decisions about your training. So today we're going to start off with the difference between strength versus size. This is a very often asked question among some newer lifters, and it might be self-evident to a lot of you, but there's a lot of people, shockingly enough, that don't really get the ins and outs exactly of how they're related, where the overlap is, because there is a lot of overlap, but specifically where that overlap is broken, where you might have to specialize for one over the other, and what the implications of that are. So we're going to go over the real implications. We're going to cover the different rep ranges, different protocols you would go through, why you might pick one or the other depending on your goals, your experience, and so on, and exactly how these two things are related. All right, so we have these muscles hanging from meat hooks, and we slapped a 100-pound plate on them, and we are going to look and see what makes this tick, what causes it to lift more weight, because as we program, we want to think about what the actual changes within the muscle are. So if we slice this bad boy in half, we look at it dead on, we can see individual muscle fibers. Those are the black dots. They're bundled into these red circles. That's a motor unit. So one single nerve impulse is going to pull a motor unit or a bundle of muscle fibers. Now the thing is, we cannot use all of our muscle fibers all at once. That is a protective feature. It's like a governor that our nervous system applies so that we can't injure ourselves or exhaust ourselves to the point of death. That's a problem with certain drugs that bypass that governor automatically, kind of liberates all of the muscle tissue you have available, and you can immediately start exerting more strength, and then tendons start flying off the bone. It's a bad time. So you want to make sure your adaptations are even and consistent so you can be around for a long time. Now, if we want to ask what changes we can make to this muscle so that it can hoist a heavier, what is that, a kettlebell? It's one of those old-timey like trapezoid weights. Then there's two things we can look at. One is bypassing that governor and recruiting more motor units. So every training session, it's like going up with the empty bowl of soup at the orphanage and saying, "Please, sir, I want some more." And if you do it right, the next time around, you have more motor units available, so you can produce more force without having actually gained any size. So that's a neurological adaptation. That's important for optimizing strength body weight ratio. It's important for anybody that wants to compete in strength sports, but it's also important for people that want to be strong without necessarily having a lot of mass. Now, the other avenue we could go, instead of trying to recruit more motor units, we can just get some good old-fashioned hypertrophy. The muscle fibers we do use, if we grow those, then every nerve impulse leads to a bigger production of force, and all of those motor units together makes a lot of force, so you can get stronger simply by getting bigger. Now, ideally, we have both. Ideally, if we want to be as big and as strong as possible, all the muscle fibers are bigger, and motor recruitment is about as high as we can get it. That would be ideal. Now, in practice, that doesn't exactly work out, because at the fringe of strength training, when you're trying to be as strong as possible, you don't necessarily need all of these motor units, and I'm going to get into exactly why in just a second. Also, at the fringe on the other end, for being as big as possible, you don't need the maximal motor recruitment that you can only get from specific strength training. And that type of strength training actually tends to be kind of exhausting. So it's hard to train at that level to get absolute maximal motor recruitment of an elite athlete while you're trying to maximize hypertrophy training. So at the very upper echelons of sport, there's a little bit of a fight going on, and that's what we need to worry about. Now, the good news is that doesn't really concern most of us. That doesn't even really concern me, and I'm a pretty elite strength athlete. I don't mean to blow smoke, but I do okay. So most of you aren't really going to have to worry about it, but we'll get into exactly why in just a moment. So this is just level 1 complexity. We need to go to level 2, because the muscles by themselves, you could have the strongest muscles in the world. If they don't talk to each other the right way, if they don't come together in one efficient machine and operate well with each other, you're not going to be able to do anything. And that's the same as being very weak. So we need to concern ourselves with performance. And that really is to say they need to coordinate. We need coordination. There's two aspects of that: intramuscular coordination. And that's what I was talking about. So when you consider a movement pattern, something like a squat, a deadlift, a press, there's a lot going on. The muscles are communicating to each other intermuscularly, and that's important. But intramuscularly, within the muscle, there's a specific patterning that's going on depending on the actual movement, depending on how fast you have to move. When is the muscle tensing up and freezing so that you can bounce and utilize stretch reflex? At what rate is it releasing? At what rate and at what point is it firing? How hard is it firing? Because the coordination matters. These muscles don't just pull as hard as possible. They have to talk to each other, and there's stuff that goes on the inside. So if you think, for example, a squat, if you top out your ability to squat by just squatting, you are probably going to get pretty big. You're going to gain some size, certainly, but your, let's say, quads aren't going to get as actually big as they potentially could be because you are not able to recruit all of the motor units inside a muscle to squat, because squatting does not have that demand as a main feature of it. There's only a certain pattern of motor units that are going to be used at any given time. And that's why bodybuilders use multiple exercises. That's why we hit things from different angles, because different exercises are going to utilize motor units that may not necessarily be targeted using the other one. So that's how you get well-rounded. So a bodybuilder is going to try to get all of the motor units in through these varied movement patterns in order to get a fully well-rounded, topped-out muscle. That isn't necessarily needed when you squat. So it's one of the reasons that if you see an athlete go through a volume phase, say an Olympic lifter, they might gain some size. As they start to specialize and they're only doing snatches, cleans, jerks closer to competition weight, they might actually lose a little bit of size because some of that extra muscularity wasn't really needed. They're only using the ones that go through that very specific pattern. So that's very important to keep in mind. So you're never actually going to get a muscle that is as big as possible and also as neurologically efficient as possible, because there's this push and pull. Now, as far as intermuscular coordination, that's also important because these muscles don't just pull as hard as possible. That's not a thing. If that were the case, say your glutes and quads would just be fighting over which one can produce the most torque at their given joint. So let's say it was your knee, then you would just like flop forward. And if it was your hips, you'd be in the hole, you go to stand up and your hips would just extend and you would fall back. The movement has to go off first, so there has to be coordination. Then the muscles produce more and more force together in concert in a way that allows for the movement to go off the way you want it. So again, skill, coordination, all very important, and it is somewhat different than muscular strength. This is very much required as part of building performance, but it is not supremely important because how the system operates is fundamentally the most important thing. So this is what I consider strength with a big S. This is strength with a little s. We are concerned with big S strength, what we can do in real life, the complex movement patterns we do, how we put everything together. That's really important to keep in mind. Like any lifter who needs recovery, like they need oxygen, sleep is very important to me. So I was super excited to partner with Bare Mattress for this. As a stomach sleeper, sleeping on low quality mattresses would cause my lower back to droop and I would routinely wake up with pain. But ever since Bare Mattress paired me with their firm king-size hybrid elite mattress, I've been able to wake up feeling amazing. Not only am I well rested from sleeping through the night, but I can even go into my morning workouts without feeling achy or brittle. And Bare Mattress also has a sleep quiz that takes all of the guesswork out of finding out which mattress is appropriate for you, so you don't have to wait until you get the mattress to find out if it suits your sleeping position or your preferences. Take the quiz and they will match you with the perfect mattress. Bare mattresses are also made with 3 premium foams designed to remove and push away unwanted body heat. I absolutely cook in the middle of the night and I hate being warm when I'm trying to sleep. So anything that wicks away heat and keeps me cool is an absolute plus. The best part about all of this is that Bare delivers your mattress right to your door. With free shipping in the United States, the mattress comes rolled up in a box and is super easy to set up. I was actually able to pop this sucker up on my shoulder and get it upstairs in one go. If it makes you nervous to buy something you haven't tried, Bare has a 120-night sleep trial, so you get more than 3 months to make sure that you absolutely love it. If you don't, they pick it up for you and you get a full refund. Their Labor Day sale is running now. They'll be offering 35% off plus $400 worth of sleep accessories for free with your mattress purchase for a limited time. So click the link in the description and head over to the Bare site for more details. Their Labor Day sale is ending soon. So if we look at this number line over here, 1 to 30 reps, for the size bracket, 1 to 4 reps, not great for size. That's kind of known. You'll get strong here, a lot of neurological development. That neurological development is strain. It's getting your nervous system to fire more and more motor units in the context of that movement at maximal poundages. That's the most specific thing you can do. So 1 to 6 reps does a pretty good job of that. And over here, 1 and 2 reps, really good for strength, but not overall for development because there just isn't a ton of volume there, and that's kind of known. So towards a peak, you're going to do a lot of singles and doubles because you're not really looking at anything other than the most specific thing you can do. But generally, you're not doing a lot of singles and doubles in training. There are some exceptions to that, obviously, but generally 3, 4, 5, 6 reps are thought of as like a really good strength range where you're getting a lot of like multiple variables that all contribute to strength. So that's a good way to live if you're really concerned with strength. Ones and twos, there's a lot of strain, so that's good, a lot of skill development, very specific, but just low volume, and it's hard to recover from. So it's hard, even if you try to do volume, like it's hard to bounce back in order to get enough good touches. 3, 4, 5, 6, a little easier to recover from, a lot more volumes baked into it. And it looks like Rip was onto something with his 5s because you get the ability to do more volume, better recovery, but it's still strength specific. And it overlaps right here with the approved hypertrophy range, which seems to be between 5 and 30. I've also heard between 3 and 30 reps, although, you know, I don't know how many Olympians you're going to see doing exclusively 3s and 4s. Also, I don't know how many are doing like 25s and 30s. So I'm a little skeptical about this number. I think there's limitations into that range. People have pulled that out of, you know, a lot of studies, a lot of exercise science research. But in practice, I'm also inclined to believe variability has to exist in some capacity. You can ask yourself as a thought experiment, are bodybuilders good because they tend to have varied rep ranges and varied movements? Or are they good in spite of it? Is it just something you can do because they all exist along this continuum? I'm inclined to believe if you just picked one rep range, that's all you did, you probably wouldn't get the same progress. But a feature of these higher reps, now notice the trend, the closer you are to a single rep, the more strength development you get. That's universal. So while doing 8 to 12, this is like the classical hypertrophy range, and it still stands, it's smack in the middle of this range. This might not get you as strong as doing, say, 3s and 4s in the short term. It might not get you those short-term adaptations, but it still can get you pretty strong. I do a lot of, you know, double-digit sets of deadlifts, of squats, of presses, and so on, and the extra volume does have a benefit. Some of it is in building some muscularity that the lower rep ranges don't tend to do, in my opinion, as well. Some of it is in skill acquisition, especially with simpler lifts. Something like a bench press, more touches means more kind of carving out those pathways, which is really important. So there's still benefit here. And the thing is, 8s, 10s, 12s get you a lot stronger than 20s, and 20s actually get you stronger than 30s. So that trend exists across this continuum. And I think that's one of the reasons why something like linear periodization works, where you're starting around maybe 8, 10, 12 reps, you know, the classic Western periodization. And over time, you're getting more and more strength specific. So you're never in a position where strength isn't being trained at all. It's just a matter of how specifically is it being trained. So all these reps allow for more volume, which is shown to be very good for muscle growth. I know there's controversy. I know there's guys that think 1 or 2 sets to failure and just maximize recovery and you're good. But as best we can tell from anecdote, and there's a ton of research that shows if you increase volume to a point, it tends to be better for muscle growth. High recovery, it's a lot easier to recover from 8s, 10s, and 12s than it is from 3s, 4s, and 5s. But there is low strength transfer as you get lower. And then when you're down here, even on this side, 20s and 30s, not great for strength, but I like it occasionally for blood flow. If it contributes to hypertrophy at all, it's going to do something so it has a point where it is appropriate, although it's not going to be a staple. Now, if you're looking at things like 20 rep squats, that is an entirely different animal. Think of this as like a typical set. Breathing squats are kind of weird because it's more like a series of submaximal singles. It's more like 20 very, very intense reps over an entire workout as opposed to one set. It's a little bit different if you're thinking about 20 reppers. Think of this as like one straight continuous set. And if you've ever done that with squats, if you try to pulse through 20 reps straight, you know it's not nothing as far as a growth stimulus goes. So we can broadly think about these different approaches to training. Are we going to be more strength specific or are we going to go broad? And again, this is from more of a strength focus because we've established that strength is a bit more complex. Strength hinges on different constituents, whereas size, it benefits from a couple different things, but you don't have to build them together. Size is more about straining the muscle and progressing that over time. And then you get a bigger and bigger muscle. Where strength, it requires some neurological work, some skill-specific work. It requires a bit of hypertrophy. And that's why you have these more elaborate models for competitive lifting that try to arrange all those. So we're gonna cover those right now. A strength-specific approach, think of that more as barbell only. Specific stuff is going to be skill dependent, so the lifts, The squatting, the bench, I don't know why I did finger quotes there. The lifts are the lifts. I'm not implying that they aren't the lifts. Squat, bench, deadlift, your competitive lifts. I do a lot of overhead pressing as a main lift. So I'm building skill by doing that more. So it'd be something where either I'm doing a lot of sets with that lift, or maybe I'm only doing that lift and I'm just applying a lot of effort. So very limited on accessory work, very heavy on the skill work. And the rep ranges tend to be a little more specific as well. So some good examples of specific stuff. The most specific stuff would be a powerlifting program that doesn't hinge on a lot of smaller accessory movements, something that has high frequency squatting, benching, deadlifting, low reps almost exclusively, limited accessory, non-linear, that's another big one. There is linear programs that are powerlifting specific, but when you get the frequency really high, you see a lot of bouncing around of volume and intensity that goes back to Soviet stuff. That's very complex, very effective, sure, for certain groups. Also very complicated, can be kind of mind-numbing, not as enjoyable, I think, the way that most people like to train, which either focuses on progressions you can keep in front of your mind, you're chasing those numbers week to week, or where you have the ability to do a variety of things, so it's not just squat, bench, deadlift. So one example of that would be a fives-based LP, or any type of linear progression, where, okay, it's monotonous, you're doing the same types of lifts, but at least you're focused on the progression, so you get to see the weight climb up. So that's kind of exciting, or at least is exciting for a lot longer. Now, if we go to more of a broad approach, now we're doing more of a variety of movements. We have big and small movements, and we have a variety of reps. This is going to be a bit more conducive to size, and you're going to see the extreme of broad is going to be bodybuilding specific, which is almost exclusively small movements. You don't care about movement patterns at all. You use big lifts just because you think it might be better for targeting a particular muscle because you can handle more load. But besides that, you're picking everything apart surgically. You're also using a variety of reps because we have this big range that allows you to get hypertrophy in some capacity. So you should never be too stagnant. You can bounce back and forth. You can do a lot of different things as long as there is some progression. We're going to get to the importance of progression in a minute. So from a strength standpoint, we want to be able to get the best of all worlds, to get as strong as possible. We want to build as much muscle as we can, and as much as it helps with our lifts. We want to be able to get those neurological adaptations, and we want the skill, and we need to be able to recover from it. That's the hard thing, because remember, these low reps, high strain, but low recoverability, and that can present a big problem. Bodybuilders have an ace up their sleeve. This stuff is easy to recover from, and you don't need to be prepared to do it. For a heavy strength session, you need preparedness. For an all-out bodybuilding session, you can be a little sore. You don't have to exactly space your workouts apart because you don't need that predictability. Or if a little fatigue sets in, so what? You're not hitting an 8-rep PR. You can still get a lot of work anywhere else. So they are a bit different. So from a strength standpoint, Western linear periodization is a good example. Like powerlifting, like nonlinear, that's like a Soviet example of things bouncing around like a Shako program. Western linear periodization is very clean. We like things to look good on paper. That's a main feature of Western culture. So it's easy to conceptualize. So we do this linear thing where we do a lot of volume. So it's non-specific here. We're doing a lot of variety, a lot of reps, a lot of different exercises, and we're getting some strength work. It's not entirely strength work, but it's some. We're getting bigger, we're building capacity, we're rounding out all these qualities, and then we get a bit heavier, more strength specific. Now we're in, 8, 6, maybe 5 reps. And then down here now we're doing very little work, just the heaviest effing work that we can do, and we're cutting out all the BS, and now we're sharpening the tip of the spear. So the idea of periodization is that you're stacking these qualities together so they all come together at the right point, so you have a perfectly peaked meet. Linear periodization is fantastic. It makes sense for sports because you have so many conflicting things. I'm inclined to believe that linear periodization works, and it does work, but it's more about the novelty. It's more about getting some progress and then switching to something different. So right as diminished returns set in, you move to something fresh. I think that's when it works the best because lifting isn't quite as complicated as preparing for like rugby is, but it still works very well. They talk about phase potentiation, like the size helping the strength and so on. But like we covered earlier on, gaining size doesn't guarantee it's going to transfer exactly the way you want to a particular lift. So it's a little more fuzzy. And then you have things like concurrent or power building that kind of mashes these things together. Concurrent is you're just always going heavy, always doing reps, always doing accessory. So you're mixing and matching all those things. Where power building still has kind of a periodization thing to it. I like to think of it as bodybuilding, but like you have a strength progression for the main lift that's going to wave through kind of a natural thing. It's not just maximal all the time, which concurrent tends to be. So that's a subtle difference. So Bull Mastiff, my program that's pretty popular, if I do say so myself, that's an example of power building. Really anything that leans on a main strength-based movement, tries to build skill in that, tries to progress that forward, and then does a bunch of bodybuilding BS afterwards. The idea is to try to be as well-rounded as possible, to really focus on size and high reps and volume as a driver of size, and using that in the context of a strength movement that you're practicing on a regular basis. So, my opinion on how this should inform your decision. So the important thing that we're going to talk about here is that progression is king. It doesn't really matter so much which one you pick as long as you have the ability to demonstrate progress in it. So there's two hits that I normally think of with a training program. When you do something new, there's the hit of doing something new. You went in, you experienced that workout, it was a different workout. The second hit is how that program progresses. That's the one that's important. People are fixated on the here and now. What am I doing today? Is this the optimal thing? The most important thing, regardless of what you do, is that you know how to move it forward. And that's what we're going to get into in the rest of the series. So imagine this little Mikey over here, 135-pound squatter. Now imagine this guy takes just a simple blended approach, which kind of marries both worlds. It's not specialized as strength. It's not just bodybuilding, but it's like a linear progression or like a simple blended approach. And eventually he squeaks out a 500-pound squat. Now let's conceptualize if Mikey went a different route. Let's say he only wanted size and started focusing on bodybuilding exclusively. So he just did a typical bro split, a lot of variation, a lot of different reps, never focused on strength, didn't care how strong he was. He just wanted some big old meaty legs, and that's all he was going to do. Well, it stands to reason that the fixation on hypertrophy over strength would have led Mikey to some meaty ham hocks before he got to this point where he had a 500-pound squat. So not only would he not need to acquire a 500-pound squat to have similarly beefed up legs, but he probably would have gotten there sooner than this point. He would have gotten bigger legs faster, comparable strength would have come later. That's what stands to reason. And similarly, if he instead focused on strength and went from a 135-pound squat into powerlifting specificity, like hyper specificity under some like international coach or something, it stands to reason he would have been able to squat 500 pounds much sooner, and that the beefy legs would have had to come much, much later. Now, that works in theory. In reality, you have to consider a couple of things, and that's what is true for a 135-pound squatter, for somebody who's brand new. Well, the thing is, size tends to increase very, very, very quickly in new trainees, regardless of what they're doing. It's part of newbie gains because we all walk around way under muscled from like a normal homeostasis, like a normal like baseline of where our body wants to be, because we're all sedentary, we don't do a lot, we're not hyperactive. So by virtue of being active, we grow muscle really fast. So however much muscle you have right here, you can think of it as being artificially low. Now, one of the easiest, fastest things you can do is slap on muscle. And remember, the strength specific stuff isn't great for it, even in a new lifter. So you're going to see short-term strength adaptations that might be promising in the beginning, but skill is going to be low. It takes a while to get coordinated, to get comfortable. That tends to benefit from more reps with submaximal work. And those size gains aren't going to come as quick if you're only doing a couple reps at a time, even with a very new lifter. So in practice, strength specialization, I think, doesn't work quite as well as bodybuilding specialization does. So I heavily bias when I'm recommending people to what they should do to start out, how to kind of check options off their list so they're left with fewer things to worry about. I recommend they stay above this diagram here. This works very, very well for intermediates and up who are hell-bent on powerlifting and nothing else. They don't care about anything else. They live, breathe, bleed, sweat powerlifting. They're working with somebody that knows how to run these hyper-specific programs that have a lot of undulation in them, and there's just a lot of math under the hood to worry about. This stuff tends to globally work better for development, and development is a hard thing. Getting the size, getting the frame, getting well-rounded, getting all of these things that can potentiate you for strength later on is difficult, and it's better to do it early on. So all things being equal, I prefer things that have a bit more variety. That would be for somebody brand new, either doing bodybuilding, if it appeals to them, if they can work hard and be consistent and kind of go and play in the gym and get comfortable with all these different things, or a blended approach. And I think those two are great. It's one of the reasons I wrote bull mastiff as I did, because I thought it was a good balance of focusing on reps and volume for size and for rounding that base out, but also for kind of pointing you towards something a little bit more strength specific. Now, I really like simple LPs because they solve a bit of a different problem. I don't think they tend to be as good, all things being equal, as developing somebody long-term, but they're good enough where it's not really worth worrying about if that's the best way that you can show up to the gym and get it done. If you have a brain that likes to focus on points of progression, that likes to fixate on the numbers and say, this is what I did today, this is the skill work I did with this lift, and I just want to focus on beating that a little bit at a time. It's comfortable, it's easy, it's convenient, and the gap in potential development over a given year or several year period is not going to be so great that this should somehow take a backseat, or that you should avoid it if you think that's a better way of getting it done. It just tends to be that if you're focusing heavily on size as opposed to strength specificity, size biases a little more universally appropriate. Now, once you get well beyond this and you're in competitive bodybuilding territory, this stuff diverges pretty aggressively. When you're at the point where you're looking for, like, to win your first bodybuilding show, you're going to worry less and less and less about strength, and you're going to round yourself out as a bodybuilder. Similarly, when you're chasing a national record or a world record in powerlifting, you are going to be really dumping a lot of the stuff in your programming that is not conducive towards topping you out. More specialized lifters require more specialized training. That's a point. However, wanting to be specialized is not the same as being specialized. That's a big takeaway here. Wanting to be specialized still requires you go through the journey that gets you there. And you do that by establishing a very wide base, being well-rounded, making sure that you leave no stone unturned. So in my opinion, lifters starting out need to have a more balanced approach, because it's going to be like an insurance policy. You don't know how exactly you respond to one type of stress versus the other. So doing bits of different things that all kind of help you at that point in time, you're going to get more insight into how your body responds to different stressors. You're going to have a more well-rounded physique. You're going to have a more complete package for later on when you do have to be very specific for that lift. You're not going to have to worry about your weak upper back or your shitty rear delts or anything like that. And the fact is, earlier on, just about everything works to make you stronger. So you really want to capitalize on that to do the most you can to be the most well-rounded down the road. So the good news is that you can go from kind of a generic level of physical ability to being somewhat formidable using a whole myriad of different approaches. That's really good news. It takes the pressure off of having to pick the exact right thing. You don't need to focus on optimization. Whatever you do pick, you need to be able to progress. That's the most important takeaway from this. The overlap, it's more than that 5 or 6 rep range. You can get very strong progressing 8s, 10s, and 12s. That's most of what strongman is. That's most of what I do when I'm trying to drive up my numbers, because most contests are for reps, not for max weight. And you can also get a good amount of muscle working in those very, very productive strength ranges. Just look at anything Ripeto's ever written. I know he's a meme, but it's correct. 5s are really good for transferring over to size as well as strength. So that's something to keep in mind. You got a lot of options. My main recommendation is for you strength guys, wait to specialize. Wait before all you do is squat, bench, and dead for triples, doubles, and singles. Wait until you're more developed. For now, focus on building a well-rounded physique that sets you up for success at that point, because this guy gets overall bigger, stronger, faster when there is a variety of exercises, there's a variety of rep ranges, and there is consistent progression that doesn't hinge on such a complex program that can put you into a recovery hole sooner rather than later. Remember, those high rep thresholds are much easier to recover from, so there's more right answers when it comes to going hard in the paint. Now, I'm still a big fan of linear progressions for putting on size. They do work very well. They're very simple. That's a big selling point. I can write it on a cocktail napkin, hand it to anybody, say, here, do this, and it's very hard to screw up, and they work extraordinarily well. I think there just tends to be an edge to people that can balance their hard strength work with more variety. And it can be as simple as taking a linear progression and adding some smaller movements on top of it that are easy to recover from. 5-3-1-S templates like that. That's the basic idea. Have your main strength program, follow it up with some of the finer bits. Don't shy away from high rep work. Don't shy away from smaller movements. Learn how your body works, how it responds. Focus on the progression. And as you adapt, you have a better sense of what works and what doesn't, and what kind of things you need to focus on in order to get to that next level. So that's all I got for today, guys. That is a discussion of size versus strength and how that can inform your training. after this, we are finally going to get into some actual progressions. There will be a breakdown of some exercises down the line, but right now I really want to focus on exactly what you're doing today and how you're moving it forward. Because like I said, progression is king. Your ability to move forward predictably, regardless of which style of training you do, is ultimately what determines your success. So that really is going to be the backbone of everything we talk about here. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Leave your questions and comments in the comment box. Better yet, take it to Patreon. That is where I answer questions and update my training weekly. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.